Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Greg Watkins, Executive Director of the British Chamber, standing in for James Pitchen today, who's Chair of the Property Infrastructure Working Group. Today's P&I Group webinar is looking at the Thailand hotel market with an outlook for next year. Our guest speaker today, and a warm welcome back to Kun Nikom Jensiri Ratanakorn, who is Director of Hawath HTL. Based in Bangkok, Kun Nikom advises both local and international clients on hospitality projects in locations including Bangkok, Phuket, Samui, Krabi, Phang Nga, Hua Hin, and Chiang Mai. He has comprehensive skills in feasibility analysis, investment underwriting, and asset management, and regional experience from years working with hotel operators, investors, and consulting firms. As usual with our webinars, please do post any questions or comments during the presentation, and we'll answer as many as we possibly can after Kun Nikom's presentation. And judging by the large number of bookings today, it's clearly a popular topic, and I'm sure there'll be many questions. So without further delay from me, a very warm welcome to you again, Kun Nikom, and over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg, for the introduction. It's good to be back doing another webinar for the British Chamber of Commerce Thailand. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. As Greg mentioned, we, Hawath HTL, is a hospitality research and consulting firm where our work are pretty much data-driven with various research tools and analytical procedures being used. While we're waiting for more people who are on their way to join this session, I just want to say something before we carry on. We are all living in a big data world, and that's why we're here today. We want to take advantage and make use of data, right? We want to learn what's going on and learn the historical trends and try to predict the future in the best possible way. However, I want to emphasize the importance of working together as an industry to actually expand the database, because the larger the data pool, the fewer noises are present out there. Also, the larger the data pool, the more information and in-depth analysis we could provide to industry partners and all of you here today. So for us specifically, we conduct an annual survey of hotel operations, which is widely used for performance benchmarking. If you're interested to learn more and decide later on whether to participate or not, please feel free to contact me directly. Okay, so back to this presentation. Seems like a hot topic for all of you here today. I'm just going to do it step by step. And at the end of the day, please take it with a grain of salt, because this is for a market-wide conclusion. For your particular property specifically, you need to see and adapt as appropriate. And hopefully you will find this session useful. So to prepare 2022 forecast, we have reviewed a few major areas. First, historical occupancy, average daily rate, and revenue per available room, so-called RevPAR, for the 4 select hotel markets, Bangkok, Phuket, Pattaya, Hua Hin, on monthly and annual basis. Secondly, performance of other major hotel markets around the world, such as US, China, Europe, Maldives, and Singapore as the closest benchmark. So we hope the information could provide a broader context for your understanding, and also good indicators for recovery patterns, as some of these markets are transitioning back to the pre-COVID days. Thirdly, we have also reviewed demand and supply fundamentals of Thailand. So let's start with the historical performance. After 2019 and a good first quarter of 2020, the whole world, including Thailand, has been hit really hard by this pandemic. From 2020 onwards, markets like Phuket and Bangkok that rely so much on international demand suffer the most. Occupancy and rate declined sharply. Bangkok performance was sustained to a certain extent by the low-rated quarantine demand. On the other hand, markets like Pattaya and Hua Hin were doing so much better than the other two because they're able to capture domestic consumption. In 2021, the COVID situation here deteriorated sharply, with a few major outbreaks causing demand to evaporate. So Pattaya and Hua Hin also cannot sustain the same performance level. Both markets saw further decreases in occupancy and rate, and Pattaya specifically to a larger extent. So if we look at actual performance numbers, Bangkok usually see relatively strong occupancy, nearly 80% in 2019, now dropping to 20+% in 2021 year to date. Not surprising, but it's a shocking number, right? Pattaya and Phuket normally have very healthy occupancy in the 70 range. In 2021, both markets see occupancy figures short of national average. In the past, Hua Hin is kind of a tough market to be in due to weekday, weekend demand disparity. However, in 2021, it's still holding their occupancy not so great, but above the other resort markets due to domestic support. The destination is relatively small, so it's able to manage the virus spread as well as the mass vaccination more effectively. This chart actually shows how performance is trending relative to the 2019 level. So the 100% mark at the top means the performance is back to the pre-COVID level. And as of now, it's clear that there's no sign of recovery for all these markets in Thailand. Pattaya and Phuket have become real drags to the overall utilization of Thailand hotels. In terms of average daily rate, Hua Hin and Phuket rates generally have been driven by weekend and high season performance respectively. Bangkok and Pattaya rates are generally lower because they are pretty much volume driven. The 2020 rate was skewed to an unusual high level for Phuket because of the strong first quarter, which coincides with the high season, as we all know. 2021 is the reality check for Phuket now that they are in the pandemic. The rates substantially dropped to about the same level as Pattaya to sort of boost domestic demand to a certain extent. Bangkok rates were dragged down from low-rated quarantine demand that it has to accept. So when reviewing the index trends, Bangkok sacrificed rates the most to sustain its occupancy level. Concluding with RevPAR comparison across the board. So from about 2,000 baht range in 2019 across all markets, RevPAR collapsed to just a few hundred baht to 700 baht in 2021 year to date. So RevPAR is down by about 70 to 90% from Hua Hin down to Phuket. So next we'll see how this stacked up in comparison to other important hotel markets worldwide. US and China adopt two different approaches. Since mid-2021, US opened up and transitioned back to pre-COVID life, allowing foreign visitors to enter the country and dropping travel restrictions and face mask requirements in many states. Meanwhile, China still maintained an almost absolute border closure. relying mainly on domestic demand and consumption. Regardless of the approach, both performed pretty well. They were able to recover occupancy by about 80% or more. Moving to a resort market like Maldives, it reopened in 2020 and imposed very few travel restrictions. Therefore, enjoyed demand from winter and summer vacationers. Occupancy recovered pretty strongly. Another strong performer here is Singapore, and it's pretty unusual. It drove international demand from quarantine business and also get tremendous government support. On the other hand, Europe, it sort of fell behind the other top markets, but still doing better than Thailand at the bottom. It started to ease out restrictions, especially among EU members, driving healthy summer turnaround and also saw good occupancy growth. Well, obviously, the only market here that has not bottomed out is our country, Thailand, struggling with a few outbreaks and slow vaccination progress, pushing out the country reopening milestone towards the end of the year. Looking at rate performance across the board, Maldives is obviously a clear leader, and its rates in 2020 and 2021 have been driven by strong high season performance, well above 2019 level. So we could probably see the consolidation of high yielding demand into this market. Other markets like US, China, and Europe saw a 20% rate reduction. And even though their occupancy started to recover healthily, rate recovery is still mild to moderate. Thailand rates dropped very significantly in 2021 because of two reasons. So first, 2020 rate was driven to a certain extent by a strong high season contribution in first quarter prior to the pandemic. And the second reason was aggressive promotional offerings to stimulate domestic demand. And this is quite a small pie for Thailand to begin with. Singapore is quite similar to Thailand. Their rate took a hit and also nosedive, though it's able to drive pretty good utilization due to small market size. In terms of RevPAR comparison, Maldives, US, and China are good performers, and Europe is in the middle. It has just seen a good sign of recovery this past summer with an occupancy uptick. Singapore and Thailand remain at the bottom. The two markets rely too heavily on international demand, and with border closure and strict travel movement controls in place for the most part of this year, revenue performance were hampered. Leisure travelers have more options to choose from, and they have not been coming back, to Singapore and our country because there's so many restrictions, so many rules. Business travelers also postpone trips and switch to use meeting and virtual event technology in the meantime. So how will Thailand look like in 2022? This is like an easy question, but it's very, very difficult to, answer and to be so precise. There are many factors that must be taken into considerations on both demand and supply sides. Let's start with demand. We have listed out pros and cons so that we can form a view, and the items on both sides are pretty neck and neck. There are several good signs. For example, high vaccination rates in the priority tourism markets like Bangkok, Phuket, and Hua Hin. Government travel stimulus packages, so-called Thai Tiuด้วยกัน, long haul inquiries that start to kick in for this winter season, lifting of restrictions over travel to and return from Thailand by several major countries, particularly the EU. However, we must be quite realistic going forward and anticipate uncertainties ahead of us. And now we are shifting to the con side. At the moment, vaccination remains pretty low in other parts of Thailand, and there are fears of potential emerging new variants breaking into our country. It seems our 2022 could be following the footsteps of Western countries, which opened up earlier this year. Some of them encounter subsequent virus spreads and reinstate travel control measures affecting the hotel industry eventually. So it looks like it's going to be a road uphill, but it's going to be quite a long and bumpy road. Groups will be hard to recover so soon, as organizer will need more clarity and certainty to ensure that their confirmed event program will be able to carry on. Several countries still keep their borders in strict controls, like China, which is our most important feeder market. China border will likely remain closed until the 20th National Congress occur in October 2022 for stability purposes. Looking at other big markets like Russia and India, their low vaccination rates leave them with a big question mark of when we would see substantial impact on demand recovery from these markets. More cons are following. Additional travel costs will impact. Additional costs from COVID-related precautions will impact rate recovery because travelers are trying to manage their spending. Complicated travel and entry requirements and also frequent and sudden rule changes will eventually hurt our country's reputation and deter travelers' decisions. There are other markets out there around the world who are more flexible and ready to capture leisure demand and ramp up more quickly next year. I feel there are a few more important demand characteristics that we should take a look at before we derive our forecast. First, nationality mix of all four markets. Hua Hin and Pattaya benefit the most from domestic demand, and you could clearly see the navy blue bar at the bottom. Hua Hin and Phuket, the other pair, are anticipated to sort of enjoy the first wave of returning demand from Europe, whereas a pair of Bangkok and Pattaya still need to wait for the return of Asian tourists, making up at least 1/2 of their room nights. Russia, included in Europe, is a major contributor to Pattaya and Phuket. And based on recent plans, and it's being excluded from the list of approved inbound markets, this market will likely take time to recover. As for business mix, we would get to see Bangkok, Pattaya, and Hua Hin high dependence, relatively high dependence on groups in comparison to Phuket. Hua Hin and Pattaya's group is partially contributed by domestic corporate markets. So this trend will likely carry on and benefit the two markets, whereas Bangkok will have to continue to wait for a return of international groups. Moving over to the supply fundamental. So we must be mindful that right now, only a fraction of hotel supply remain in operation. However, when the market shows a good sign of recovery early next year, more and more existing hotels will start to prepare for reopening, not to mention new hotels being constructed that would be ready next year. And those hotels that have recently been completed over the past couple of years and have not ramped up. On top of that big bulk of supply, we must not ignore product like conotels, which will dilute short stays from typical hotel products. Many real estate developers have been paying attention to and recently adopted this business model. So looking at the pipeline, both Bangkok and Phuket show quite a big number of rooms. The impact will be more evident for Phuket as Bangkok's hotel market size is much larger. It is clearly shown on this slide with Phuket supply growth, the red line shooting up in 2022. With all analysis and reviews we have done, laying out reasoning and making reference checks with other regions' recovery patterns, we feel occupancy will recover to and hover around 25 to 40%. Hua Hin is better placed than the other three markets. Phuket and Bangkok's occupancy growth would likely be dampened by supply from both from reopening of existing supply and new hotel projects. Meanwhile, Pattayaa's slow vaccination progress could hamper their first quarter results. For Hua Hin and Pattaya, our rate forecast is pretty much in line with the second half of 2020 performance, mainly because we feel their main focus is on driving occupancy on the back of strong domestic support. Bangkok, as a gateway to Thailand and to these two resort markets, will somehow enjoy a transition from low-rated quarantine business to transient international demand, driving rate recovery up a notch. However, Bangkok's rate recovery would still be the lowest of all four markets due to its massive market size and many hotels. Phuket, on the other hand, is also expected to keep rate recovery in check with other resort markets, driven mainly by high rates achieved during the coming high season, as well as popular public holiday periods. Looking at resulting RevPAR, Hua Hin leads the chart, obviously, followed by Phuket, which would benefit from the return of European demand. Bangkok and Pattaya are expected to recover more slowly. We have added occupancy and rate forecasts to the first chart, lining up performance across years and markets to help you visualize recovery patterns when you go back and relook at the old slides again. So that concludes our session today. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Kunikorn. Please do post your questions, ladies and gents. We have, I think, one comment in chat. Would you like to say something about Samui, Kunikorn?
Okay. Well, yeah, it would be good to cover our markets, but unfortunately, we get to choose some. But Samui is a small market, so it relies on both European and Chinese demand. The stable growth over the past years was stimulated by Chinese demand to a certain extent. So, now that Chinese is out of the equation, I would feel, it's going to be, the seasonality would be even more apparent. And if any resorts are positioned to capture a niche demand, they would continue to enjoy recovery pattern, probably similar to Phuket to that extent. But if you touch on a mass level, then you would compete with so many other markets, right? So yeah, so that would be a tough situation to be in.
Thanks. Martin has his crystal ball out, giving it a nice rub. What's the prediction for when Bangkok returns to 2018-19 levels of rate and occupancy?
Okay, very good question. Yeah, so I think, Martin, you are looking at RevPAR recovery, right, to the pre-COVID level. So we have done our research on a long-term recovery pattern through 2025. And our view on Bangkok is, it would probably be slightly after 2025. It might not be good news, but it's the reality, and that's how we feel. And mostly it's because of a slow rate recovery process.
Kundikan, while others are posting questions, one question, if I may, it's something that hoteliers mention to me regularly relating to non-room revenue, banqueting. Thailand, Bangkok, Phuket was losing big corporate business events even prior to COVID because their price was so much higher than competing markets, particularly Vietnam, due to the high price of imported alcohol. And we see in the press rumors that there could be a change to alcohol, the import duty, the taxes on that. Do you see that? Do you see that happening? And if it did, what an impact that would have for hotels that are really going to struggle with room revenues for some time?
Oh, you mean like the impact of the removal of alcohol tax or something along that line?
Well, whether it's likely, I wish that was a positive answer. But the impact, companies like Cartier, Rolex will do their big corporate promotional events in Vietnam rather than Thailand.
Okay, I don't know if that's going to happen or not in terms of the removal of the alcohol tax. But if it does, definitely it will benefit to some extent only, because generally Vietnam rates are much lower than Thailand because their cost structure is lower, so they can go low if they want. And now that we are seeing more and more projects in Vietnam, especially those monster hotels, and you probably have to think how they're gonna fill their rooms. They're gonna have to go for cheap mass demand and groups, right? And I think the competition is gonna be even tougher in this segment. And we probably have to look back, at our properties. If we are relying on groups, we may need to see which type of groups are under a significant threat because of this development trend in Vietnam, and perhaps try to diversify and see if we can tap into different types of groups or different types of demand.
Sure. Okay, Carlos has asked a question. Which international hotel brands do you think are missing in Phuket and Bangkok?
I'm not too sure if I understand his question right. Like, does he really want me to spell out or the brands, or does he sort of want to understand if there's still an opportunity for international brands in these markets?
I guess it's more than the latter. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So even though these two markets have quite a heavy presence of international brands, but if you start thinking about the choices, there are still some brands missing for sure. In Phuket, there are a lot of high-end and luxury international brands missing. So if you line up Phuket and Bali, you would see that Bali has been able to, introduce many upmarket international brands. So this is something Phuket would probably need to catch up, and that would elevate the overall image of Phuket Island. And that's what we are going after, right? We have all been talking about quality travelers, high-end tourism, high yielding, high spenders. So, we're gonna have to start first, right? If we keep, building mediocre, mediocre mid-range products that, go after mid-range demand, mass demand. So it's a different story.
Thanks. For a couple more questions. I mean, I guess the answer, do you think the 500 baht payment on arrival will impact tourism? I guess there's a simple answer there.
Sorry, where's the question again? I didn't see it on
in chat.
Chat. Okay, hold on. Do you think the 500 baht payment on arrival will impact the tourism too? It could be, but I think the major cost items that are being imposed right now are testing costs, right? 4 times a trip, as well as the insurance cost.
Guido's question was something that maybe I'd like to pick up on. I think you said during your presentation you didn't expect tourists from China to start traveling again until really this time next year, October 2022, until the Congress, which I guess is not what a lot of hoteliers want to hear, at least in Thailand, as they put their revenue projections together for next year. But and Guido asked, do you have any indications to which nationalities will lead the tourist market return? Is it China, India, Europe, or others?
Okay. I think, on my demand slide, I probably mentioned about the bilateral agreement on unrestricted travel between Thailand and source markets as one of the important factors. So markets like US, UK, and certain parts of Europe, which are now opening up, their border and allow their residents to travel out of the country or region to, Thailand and return without quarantine requirement. Those markets would benefit Thailand the most. Yeah, so the long haul markets, and that's why Phuket would probably benefit from this trend in the coming high season.
And China, you really think there won't be any pressure from China to release overseas tourist travel before October next year?
So far, when we follow news as well as discuss internally, we have not seen any clear indication on their move to allow outbound travels out of China. And like I said, stability is a clear reason. Keeping domestic demand within the country really support domestic economy to a really large extent, because right now they are having their own problems as well, right? The real estate market and things like that. So if they make that kind of decision, after the first quarter next year and things turn wrong and there's another outbreak and things like that, and what's going to happen to the upcoming National Congress. So we don't really see a reason for opening up so soon for China.
Okay, understood. Well, oh, hold on. One last question has just popped in. Let's see, Stuart. Do you have any information on how projections for Thailand's recovery compares to recovery in Vietnam and Cambodia?
Oh, okay. We have not done a similar recovery projection for these two markets, but for Vietnam specifically, it's gonna be, I feel it's gonna be behind Thailand because I have been talking to a journalist who wanted to write about Phu Quoc reopening. They have not actually get their act together in terms of how they want to reopen and manage the domestic and international flow. And the vaccination rate is still pretty low. Then they have a larger population, so obviously there are a lot more works to be done. I think we are in a better shape to that extent.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think if you've got 2 minutes, let's just see one last question from Peter. Oh, well, he asked, how is Samui doing? We commented on Samui earlier, Peter. Contact me offline on that. Okay, Kundikan, thank you. We'll let you go now. Thank you for your time as always. It's great working with you, and thank you to all our attendees for signing on and joining us. We hope you found that useful, and we'll be posting the slides later on the BCCT website, so please do refer to them at a later date. So thank you again, Kundikan, and hopefully we can work again very soon.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks,
in person.
Everyone. Yes, for sure, in person. Have a good afternoon,
Fantastic.
everyone.
Thanks again.